Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the workshop for the Marion City Council for the month of October. We'll begin with our Pledge of Allegiance, and I ask Mayor Pro Tem Foster if she would kindly lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I appreciate that. Let the records reflect that all council members are present and accounted for, and also reflect those in attendance who are not normally here. We're going to begin with our review of the minutes. This month, we're going to do both minutes from August as well as September. I'm going to ask Madam Clerk if she would explain to us the issues regarding the August minutes.
Okay, at the September 14th meeting, a change was requested to the August 10th meeting. It was to include that a staff member also made a victim impact statement, but that actually occurred at the July 8th meeting, so that was a part of those minutes.
Very good. Thank you for clarifying that. Let's first get through these 4 sets of minutes, and then I want to circle back to those July minutes afterwards. Are there any comments, questions, or anything regarding the August 5th, August 10th, September 9th, or September 14th meetings? Ms. Foster, go ahead.
On the September 9th meeting minutes, Jim Wypreck, under City Manager Report, is referred to as Acting City Manager instead of City Manager.
Thank you, I see that.
Okay. That's all I have.
Very good. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Anyone else have any comments or questions? Councilman Bigliotti, we'll start with you.
I just wanted to make a very quick apology because I got my sets of minutes mixed up at the last meeting, and so I just wanted to say I apologize for that.
No worries. Public meetings happen later. Councilwoman Fuller, you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to, let's see here. On the September 14th, it says the Mayor and City Council workshop instead of just council meeting.
Very good. Noted. Madam Clerk, you have that? Very good. Anything else? All right, those will be for approval on Monday evening. I do want to switch back then to the July meeting. Is there any intent to amend those minutes to reflect the discussion we had? This was regarding the victim impact statement from a staff member. Councilman Bigliotti?
I just think that we should amend them to include the change that we had originally intended for that set of minutes.
Okay, can we clarify, before I do, Stephen Wypreck, do you have something to add?
Yes, I just wanted to point out before going back to the July minute, if the intent is to memorialize the other victim impact statement that was referenced in the September 9th minutes under the legal report, they did make mention of, of both Councilman Bigliotti and our IT assistant's victim impact statements there. So it is already memorialized if that's the intent.
Okay.
Given that, I wouldn't worry about requesting the changes. I just want to make sure that it is noted somewhere in the record that we had a member of staff who courageously did step forward to issue a victim impact statement, and I think that is worthy of being set down on the record.
Very good. I see that is stated in the September 9th minutes, so I think we'll leave it at that, and we'll also leave the July minutes alone going forward. Sound good to everybody? Excellent. So these 4 minutes will be up for approval on Monday evening. Now we move to our favorite time of year, our fiscal year 2020 audit. I will hand it to, I believe, our treasurer, Barry Avalone, to begin.
I believe the auditors, Michelle and Addie, will be presenting the PowerPoint, and I think Dan's working the PowerPoint. I can barely figure out how to unmute here.
Very good. Thank you very much. Well, then with that, I'll hand it off to Ms. Mills from, I say it wrong every time, DeLeon and Stang. Am I close? All right, Ms. Mills, it is all you. You are muted, by the way.
It doesn't matter how many times you remind us, we still start talking with the microphone off. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for inviting us this evening to present the results of the recently completed audit. Dan has agreed to help us and navigate us through the PowerPoint. So Dan, we're ready to begin when you are. With me this evening is Addie Blickenstaff, who is one of our senior auditors at DeLeon and Stang, and she was the lead auditor on this year's audit. Next slide. I'd like to start our presentation with a number of our required communications. As auditors, we are required by professional standards to communicate certain items to you at the completion of our audit. The first item we're required to communicate is that there were no new accounting policies adopted and existing policies did not change during fiscal year 2020. There were no transactions entered into by the city that lacked authoritative guidance or consensus. There were no difficulties in dealing with management. There were no disagreements with management, and there were no material misstatements as a result of our audit procedures. Next slide. We're going to do a few slides on the scope of our services, which is the financial statement audit. Next slide. You know, I always start our presentation by reminding everyone of individual responsibilities. It's important to remember that the financial statements are the responsibility of management. Our responsibility as the auditors is to plan and perform the audit to make sure to obtain reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free of material misstatement, and to express an opinion on those financial statements based on our audit. Next slide. The audit was performed in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards as well as government auditing standards. Next slide. The city will receive an unmodified opinion on the financial statements, unmodified being a clean audit, a clean audit. Next slide. In accordance with government auditing standards, we are also looked at the city's internal controls over financial reporting as well as compliance. Next slide. And we're required to communicate to those charged with governance any material weaknesses. On this slide, you'll see we have provided a definition of what a material weakness is. And you can see that it is a deficiency or combination of deficiencies in internal control such that there is a reasonable possibility that a material misstatement will not be prevented or detected and corrected. There were no material weaknesses identified in this current year's audit. Next slide. There were no instances of non-compliance required to be reported under government auditing standards either. Next slide. As you remember, we are required to issue 2 sets of financial statements, and you'll hear in our presentation us referencing government-wide as well as fund level. You'll see that we've referenced page numbers where when you're looking at the draft audit report, you can reference back to. The government-wide financial statements are on page 9 and 10 of the audit report, and the fund level statements start on page 11. And before we continue, I just want to again reiterate that the draft in its entirety was provided to you all. And so this is just a quick snapshot of some of the things that we think are significant and just relevant as we're completing the audit. Next slide. The next several slides are going to present a number of financial highlights, and I'm going to turn it over to Addie and tell Dan next slide.
Okay, on this first slide of financial highlights, we look at the government-wide total assets of the city, which as of year-end fiscal year 2020 were just about $40.2 million, which was a 2.5% increase from the prior fiscal year. In the pie chart, you can see that we break it down into the two activities of the city: governmental activities, which is your general fund, and business type activities, which represents your utility fund. Governmental activities had about $11.5 million, or 28% of total assets, with business type activities having just under $28.8 million, or 72% of total assets. Next slide, please. Of that $40.2 million in total assets, we wanted to highlight what the significant assets are for each activity. So just as a reminder, governmental activities total assets were about $11.5 million. And you can see of that total, 52% or $6 million represents the city's capital assets. Cash and cash equivalents comes in second at approximately $5.2 million, or 46%. And then there's a remaining $206,000 or 2% of the total assets. Next slide. In comparison, for business type activities, just to reiterate, had total assets of $28.8 million. Of that total $28 million, 67% or approximately $19.4 million were represented in capital assets. Cash and cash equivalents were just under $8.7 million, or 30%, and there was 3% remaining of approximately $726,000. Next slide, please. Now we're going to talk about the government-wide total liabilities, which were about $16.1 million, or a 3.4% decrease from fiscal year 2019. As you can see, the business type activities hold 75%, or $12.1 million of the total, and governmental activities total liabilities were just over $4 million, or 25%. Next slide. Again, we want to highlight the significant liabilities for each activity. For the governmental activity total liabilities, the net pension liability of $2.4 million represents 59% of the total. The governmental activities long-term debt is $1.1 million at year end, or 28%. And they had an other balance, which represents accounts payable and accrued expenses, of approximately $518,000, or 13%. Next slide, please. The significant liabilities for the business type activities, as you can see, the pie chart is mainly comprised of long-term debt. 96% of the total, or $11.6 million, is represented in long-term debt. The net pension liability is approximately $182,000, or 1% of that total, and the other balance represents approximately $316,000, or 3%. Next slide. I'm going to hand it over to Michelle to talk about the deferred outflows and inflows.
We added a slide to the presentation to give you the update, a definition of deferred outflows and deferred inflows. When you're looking at the draft financial statements, it's terminology that is unique and specific to governments. And so it's probably not something that is that you're used to seeing. So we've provided the definition of a deferred outflow. And you'll see that for governmental activities and for business type activities, it's roughly about $300,000 for each activity. And it's attributable to pension and debt refinancing for, I'm trying to think which fund, I think it was the utility fund. The deferred inflows, again, the governmental activities has a balance of $290,000. And the business type activities had approximately $42,000, and that was entirely attributable to the pension. Next slide. A quick accounting equation for everyone is just to remember that your assets plus your deferred outflows minus your liabilities minus your deferred inflows equals net pension. The net pension for the governmental activities was just under $7.5 million, and for business type activities, it was nearly $17 million. Next slide. Here's a pie chart that shows the citywide net position of 24.4 million, and that was a 5.3% increase over the prior fiscal year. And of the net position, 69% of it is attributable to your business type activities, and the remaining 31% is attributable to your governmental activities. Next slide, please. This slide gives you a quick snapshot of the categories of net position. So in the left side column where you see governmental activities, we have capital assets net of related debt of about 4.9 million, 2.6 million for unrestricted, for the total net position governmental activities of just under 7.5 million. For the business type activities, we had just under 7.8 million of capital assets net of related debt. There was nearly 5 million restricted, and the remaining balance, 4.1 million, was unrestricted for the total of 16.9 million net position. Next slide. And this, I'm going to turn it back to Addie.
Thank you. The next required statement is a statement of activities, which shows the expenses, program revenues, and general revenues. To start, this looks at the governmental activities, and you can see the first column shows our total expenses for governmental activities of just about 4.4 million. Over the next three columns are the program revenues, i.e. charges for services, operating grants and contributions, and capital grants and contributions. You can see governmental activities had just under 209,000 in charges for services, approximately 397,000 in operating grants. And then at the far right, you can see the remaining of revenues come from the city's general revenues of approximately 3.7 million. Next slide. Overall, the change in net position for the governmental activities was a negative 154,000 for the year. Next slide. This shows the statement of activities for our business type. Total expenses were just over $3 million. You can see the largest revenue category is our charges for services of approximately $4.2 million. And then the business type activities had approximately 227,000 in general revenues. Next slide. Overall, the change in net position for the business type activities was an increase in positive of approximately $1.4 million. Next slide.
The next several slides are going to give us a fund level perspective. As I mentioned when we started, there are two required statements, government-wide and fund level. We're going to spend a few minutes looking at the general fund. The total assets for the general fund at the end of fiscal year 2020 was just over 5.4 million. The liabilities were approximately 428,000, and the remaining balance represents fund balance, which was just over $5 million at the end of the fiscal year. We are required to break down the fund balance into 5 categories. The city currently has 4 categories. The non-spendable balance represents your prepaid expenses. Your committed balance of just over 352,000 represents funds from your park impact fees. The assigned balance represents the remaining payments on your non-cancelable leases. And then the remaining balance of just under 4.6 million is unassigned. Next slide. This slide looks at the revenues, expenses, and changes in fund balance for the general fund. The total revenues were just over 4.2 million. The expenses were just over 4.5 million. And there was a deficiency of revenues over expenditures of about 241,000. One of the requirements is for us to do a reconciliation between the fund balance and the net position. So you'll see that there's a number of adjustments to get from the fund level perspective to the government-wide perspective. For fiscal year 2020, there were capital outlay expenditures of about 721,000. Depreciation expense for governmental activities was approximately $423,000. The principal payment on your debt obligations was just over $117,000. And then the next largest item below is the net pension adjustment, which was $312,000. So this slide illustrates how we got from a decrease or a deficiency of revenues over expenses fund level to a change in net position of a decrease of $155,000. Next slide. This slide has a lot of information on it as well, and this is reconciling your fund balance to your net position and accounting for all of those things that are reconciling items. So at a fund level, we spoke about the fund balance being just over $5 million, and when we were presenting the government-wide financial statements, we talked about the net position for governmental activities being about $7.5 million. And when you look at the reconciling items, you can see that capital assets net of depreciation for governmental activities is just over $6 million. The deferred inflows and outflows come into play because they're only accounted for when we are looking at the government-wide financial statements and not at the fund level. And then you also see that the net pension liability for governmental activities of nearly $2.4 million, again, is only on the government-wide financial statements and not on the fund level, as well as your long-term debt obligations of roughly $1.1 million. So the combination of all those items get us from fund level perspective to a government-wide perspective. Next slide.
On the next several slides, we're going to look at revenues and expenses of each fund as compared to the prior year. On this first one, we're looking at the general fund revenues compared to fiscal year 19. As you can see at a quick glance, most of the categories look fairly comparable to the prior year. The biggest increase you can see is on the far left in our property taxes, increased approximately $100,000 or so from about $2.4 million to approximately $2.5 million, as expected as the city is developing more each year. Next slide. If we look at the expenditures of the general fund, you can see we have some swings in the middle. For public works, our expenditures went from approximately just over $1 million to approximately $1.5 million. In fiscal year 2020, there's a lot of capital outlay expenditures associated with the O'Brien Street Bridge project, which was not completed as of year end, and I believe is expected to be completed in the next fiscal year. The next largest swing was a decrease in the Parks and Rec category of expenditures. You can see fiscal year 19 at approximately $573,000 versus only $315,000. If I'm remembering correctly, the prior fiscal year had capital outlay expenditures related to the Stumptown Road purchase of that land. Next slide. This slide looks at the operating revenues and expenses of the utility fund. The first column is our operating revenues, which saw a 23% increase from $3.5 million in fiscal year 19 to approximately $4.3 million in fiscal year 20. The increase largely is attributable to the benefit assessments that were collected in fiscal year 20. Our operating expenses saw a 4% increase from approximately $2.5 million to approximately $2.6 million. And then respectfully, the operating income increased from approximately $965,000 to approximately $1.7 million. Next slide. Overall, the utility fund change in net position, as noted on the previous slide, had an operating income of $1.7 million, interest income of approximately $88,000, and the city paid approximately $388,000 in interest expense and fiscal fees for an overall positive increase in net position of approximately $1.4 million. Next slide. The last required statement is the budget to actual information in the back of the audit report, and this only looks at budget to actual for the general fund. So you can see the 4 columns reports the original budget, the final budget, our actual results, and the variance. You can see our original budget planned for just over 4 million, and a slight decrease in our final budget, and our actual results came in at about 4.3 million for a positive increase in revenues of 205,000. Expenditures, the original budget and the final budget were pretty comparable, about 6.3, 6.5 million versus our actual results of only 4.5 million. I believe the majority of the variance there were some planned capital outlay projects that did not end up happening in fiscal year 20 and will start in the next fiscal year. Due to those capital outlay projects, the original and final budget had a budgeted use of fund balance of 2.2 million and then a final budget of 2.4 million. And there's no actual use of fund balance per the audit report. So overall, as Michelle mentioned, our actual net change in fund balance was a decrease of 241,000 for the general fund. Next slide. We are open for any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you, ladies, for a very well presented report. I will ask members of council if there are any questions, concerns, comments about what has been shown to us. Councilman Vigliotti, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As Ms. Mills will remember, and Ms. White as well, every year I ask the same question during the audit report. Just to be very loud and clear for the sake of the public that is watching, did you find anything that was missing, misappropriated, or anything of this sort?
No, I think I probably said this last year as well. We are required to communicate anything that we see to you. We are required to communicate in writing if there would be any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal control, and certainly if we are aware of any issues of fraud. So we did not identify any of those issues during this current audit.
Thank you very much. That's it from me, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilman. Anyone else have any comments, questions while the ladies are here with us? All right, City Manager Weeprick, what do you have?
I just wanted to express my appreciation for how smoothly things went with this being a rather unusual year with things being done largely remotely. We did have some documents that were run to Frederick. Barry was kind enough to shuttle them back and forth. And with delays in the construction here, what on-site work was completed was a little disorganized, I guess, as far as placement of not having a conference room to use. So I think with all those factors, I just wanted to thank Barry and Michelle and Addie for a seamless, smooth job again this year. So with a lot of hurdles to get past this year. So thank you all.
Thank you. And I want to thank Barry as well, because she was super prepared, as she usually is. And she was very accommodating to us, because back in June, when we were doing our preliminary field work, it was not a time in which we had permission to go out to client sites yet. So when we hit that snag and said we can't come to City Hall, and you guys weren't ready for us either, Barry said, well, I can just bring original records to your office. And that certainly made things smooth for us, and we certainly appreciated it. We did come on site during final field work, which is what I like to do. And it was good to see everybody and engage and, just spend a few days together. So I do thank Barry and her team for all of their hard work. And I say this all the time too, not just during audit time. And, to get a clean audit report with no findings and no material adjustments means that they're doing their job every day, not just when the audit's taking place.
And that's exactly right. I think we are extremely fortunate to have Barry on our staff doing the fine work that she does. Every year we have such a clean audit, and it's thanks to you and everyone that works with you down there. So thank you so much for your hard work. So overall, let me just ask Ms. Mills, Ms. White, our actual position, can you give it to us are we generally in a positive position now, or do you see any concerns going forward that we need to watch out for regarding our net position?
The The net position for your utility fund looks right on. Actually, you've had some really good years, the last 2 years specifically due to significant benefit assessments. The governmental activities is always difficult to take a look at because being in the state's retirement plan, we have all of these pension adjustments and we talk about changes in assumptions and all of these various actuarial terminology. That does make it a little challenging. From a fund level, everything looks great. But you certainly can't anticipate what the market might do to actuarial assumptions and how that's going to impact your final numbers when you see the audit report. So.
Okay. And I'm not going to put you on the spot because you probably weren't expecting something like this. You've done our audit for obviously a number of years. Do you track trends year to year for municipalities like Taneytown and kind of give us an idea of that we are trending in a good way?
We probably don't compare one another because each are so uniquely different as to how they're set up, the number of funds they operate.
Well, I just mean, one municipality, but year to year.
Oh.
Going back several years for us and kind of how our trend is moving.
Yeah, I don't know, Brad, how to answer that question. So let me think about it. Maybe I'll follow up with an email.
No problem. We can talk later about that.
Okay.
Anyone else have any questions or comments for them? All right. Any closing statement? Oh, wait, Councilman Vigliotti, I see a hand.
Right. I just wanted to echo Ms. Mills' comments about Barry. We are very well served by her. And I want to say thank you to Ms. Mills and to Ms. White again for all of your hard work as well. This is one of the parts of the year that I actually look forward to because it helps, as the mayor was getting at, it helps give you a clear indication of where you are and what the trend is and where you're going to be going. And, I could not even begin to imagine the amount of work that it takes to do this. So thank you to all of you for that.
Thank you.
Well said, Councilman. All right. If there's nothing else from council, are there anything in closing from you ladies before you're dismissed? All right. If you're satisfied, then Ms. Mills, Ms. White, Ms. Avalon, you are welcome to leave the meeting.
All right. We'll see you next year.
Sounds good. We look forward to it.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. City Manager Weeprick, you have something you'd like to?
Sure. Just for council members, should you have any questions as you review things or look over the draft report, if you could please email or contact Barry and myself later this week or over the weekend at the latest, because come Monday night, I'm not likely to be able to respond to questions on the fly on a lot of this. So please do look things over and try to get us any questions you may have to give us a little time to research anything we need to have a response for Monday night. Thank you.
Yep. And I do want to ask council to please take the time. I know it's 42 pages that they gave you. I do encourage you to please look over it. And just 6 eyes are better than 12 eyes are better than 2, I guess is the best way to put it. If anything raises concern, please contact Barry as well as Jim, and we'll get all the questions answered. With that, we're going to move forward in our meeting. I will ask the council if there are any conflicts of interest on anything on the agenda this evening.
No, sir.
No, sir.
All right. Everyone is good. We shall move on. Up for adoption Monday evening, we will have resolution 2020-11. This is our monthly water allocation. This one for October of 2020. Any comments, questions, concerns? Councilman Vigliotti, does the math add up?
The math definitely adds up. I have a question, and I guess it kind of could go under departmental reports, but I figured because it's the water allocation, it might be it might be justifiable to ask it at this point in time. And I know that in Kevin's report, he talked about us maintaining steady water levels, and I'm kind of just wondering if God forbid things do deteriorate, is that going to affect the water allocation plan that we come up with every month? And if so, how is that going to affect it?
All right, Mr. Weeper, would you like to answer that?
Sure. Think of the water allocation plan as our water budget. So that's based on our permitted numbers. if we do get into a situation where our well levels plummet, we would certainly ramp things up to away from voluntary restrictions to mandatory to phase 2. But as far as stopping new construction, things would need to be very severe, and I think that would actually take some additional action from council to do that. So as long as we're not exceeding our permitted limits, this water allocation should stand. And we are far from that point where we really need to be worrying. But of course, if we don't get some rain, particularly over the fall when it recharges the aquifers, during the summer, the vegetation soaks up most of the precipitation that we get, and it really doesn't have much of a recharge benefit. But so should this continue, we could see those levels start to drop, but we're far from that at this point.
All right, thank you very much, Jim.
All right, thank you. Anyone else have questions, concerns about our water allocation? All right, everyone's satisfied that will be up for adoption on Monday evening. With that, I will go back to Mr. Wieprick for our city manager report.
Alrighty, I'll be brief this evening since we had our audit presentation. The Roberts Mill Run stormwater project is nearing completion. The county bid the plantings that are supposed to go around the perimeter of the wet pond, and they awarded the bid to Hill Lawn Service, Inc., and planting should be completed this month. The planting material has been ordered, so right now we're just waiting for that to come into the lawn service and for them to get out in the field. So that is very close to being completed. As far as city office construction goes, the good news is that the contractor and electrician were on site again today to work on what must be the most complicated door latch in the world. And they have it operating, but we still are dependent upon the security company to come back and basically tie that all into a relay and put things on a timer and tie into the alarm system. So right now, until we have that, the front door is essentially not usable for the public. So we are waiting for that to happen. They are currently scheduled to be here on Monday, the 12th. We realize that is a holiday, so we're making sure with Vector Security that they don't honor that holiday. And either myself or Dan will be here to make sure that happens on Monday. So we are so close, but still the front lobby is our last thing to get past before we can have a final inspection. So very close, should be within the next week, but I've been thinking that for the last month. So that's where we are on the building, and really that's kind of the highlights of it. So I'll leave it at that unless anyone has questions for me.
Are there any questions for our city manager? All right, hearing none, I will mention, he mentions in his report about Chief Etzler discussing new safety protocols. I've also spoken to Chief Etzler about some active aggressor training, not only for staff downstairs, but also something for mayor and council up here in the event of something happening during a meeting, that we do have some sort of protocol that we would follow in that case. I've seen other municipalities around the state and around the country who are doing such exercises. I think it's only appropriate that we do the same as well. So keep an eye on that. Once we get into a situation where we can all come together in one room again, that's something on the horizon. Very good. With that, are there any questions on the departmental reports that were presented to us? Mayor Pro Tem Foster?
On Jim, maybe you can answer this. I noticed on Kevin's report, he said that we didn't incur any violations for on the tipping fees, but that pretty soon they're going to start charging us anyway.
Yes.
My question is, if we have once we're charged, if we have a violation, is that an extra charge?
That would be an extra charge, yes, because there's going to be a different rate for the tipping fee that's going to be added now for recycling. I believe that's a lower rate than the solid waste fee. So if there's material in the recycling that's not supposed to be there, will be charged the solid waste rate rather than the recycling rate. So it
Okay.
would result in an additional expense.
Thank you.
I believe, and my numbers aren't exact, I believe that the regular waste rate is around $75 a ton. The new recycling rate, it's going from $0 a ton to, I think, $35 a ton. So if we do have contaminated recycling, we're going to get charged an extra $40 a ton on that. It's unfortunate. I spoke to the commissioners and they said there's simply no market for recycling anymore. It used to be that they could get paid for recycling materials, then it was even. Now there's nothing to do with it. So hopefully that could change in the future, but as of right now, it's unfortunate. Any other questions on departmental reports? I do want to note while we're talking about it that at the police station, the drop-in ballot box is now in place and chained to a post. So encourage anyone who chooses to vote using that method to utilize that box as well. I appreciate everyone's cooperation on that. Mayor Pro Tem Foster, please let Mr. Foster know our gratitude for making that happen. Just keep in mind, let everyone know. I know it's become a contentious issue, you know, how you vote. I think the most important thing is we make every possible way for people to vote available to them. So with that, I'm going to go to Mr. Gullo for our legal report. Sir, what do you have for us?
Good evening, everybody. The good news is the lawsuit that the city was in with the Trevanian Terrace property foreclosure, where we had many years ago at this point in time purchased the unpaid taxes to the defunct corporation to acquire the stormwater management pond area that would have been dedicated to us anyway. That has gone through the courts and gone through the COVID delay, and Judge Titus signed the order granting our petition, I guess, last week or so. So we still need to get the county to execute a deed to us, as the tax assessor does, but all the fighting is over and all the worry's over. And there really wasn't much fighting because there was no one there to fight with. But so the good news is that we are the owners of that, and just in time, because I know the city manager and the county are ready to move ahead on their stormwater management remediation project that they're using that land for. So that's good news all around. And that's really all I have this month.
All right. Any questions for the city attorney on his report or any other legal matters that can be discussed in public? Everyone satisfied? Silence from Councilman Vigliotti. All right. I think we're good to move on. Up in old business, bringing back up from last month, the 2020 annual leave payout. This is primarily in regard to the police department. The latest figures from Chief Etzler is that he's been able to get it down to below $12,000 if we choose to do a payout for annual leave for the officers. Just to refresh your memory and for those tuning in, due to COVID-19, which I feel like is a scapegoat for everything right now, our officers were not able to take leave, use any of their personal time, anything like that. And as a result, they have accrued quite a substantial amount of leave that they've not been able to use. We did request, and Chief Etzler did a great job of encouraging people to use leave as much as possible for the last couple months of the year. That number has come down. I want to say it was 20 some thousand initially, and now we're down to under 12,000. So they are requesting that we consider a payout for them to finish out the year. Does council wish to discuss this? Because we will be looking for a decision Monday evening as council's wishes. I open it up to you. Councilman Vigliotti, go ahead.
We were hoping last month that the number would come down. As you noted, Mr. Mayor, the number has come down. And, given the nature and the causes and the consequences of what occurred that, led to this happening, I think it is justifiable that we go ahead and pay them out. And I'm more than happy to make a motion on Monday night to that effect.
I appreciate that. It is something that I don't think any of us enjoy having to do, to make such a large payout at the end of the year. It is extraordinary circumstances that we went through, and we don't want to forget the time and sacrifice that they put in having to cover the way they did, the adjustments to their schedule. And that goes for city staff in general, who everything was kind of turned upside down for all of them. Anything else from council who would like to discuss? Okay, hearing none, we will be seeking a decision from council Monday evening if you so choose. Moving into new business, we have our monthly financial report presented to us. Any comments, questions regarding the monthly financial report? All are satisfied. I have a feeling after the audit presentation, the last thing I want to look at are more numbers right now. Very good. Also up for approval Monday evening will be the accounts payables. Anything from council regarding the accounts payables? All right. Hearing none, we're going to get into new business regarding private septic systems within city limits. I'm going to begin by just giving you a rough idea. Our code explicitly forbids private septic systems as well as private wells within city limits. We've been approached by a new owner of a property that is in city limits. It has not been habited or habitable for quite some time now, and they're requesting an exception, asking the council to allow them to put in a private septic and I believe a well as well. With that, I'm going to give it to either Mr. Wieprick or Mr. Gullo. Which one of you would like to speak first?
I'll jump in since I didn't get to talk very much during my report, and lawyers like to talk, right? So,
Amen.
So without getting into the facts of the matter, my concern when we discussed this internally was while our charter or code has provisions for this, it doesn't have a process for it. So it doesn't have a way that people can just say, hey, I want you to grant me an exception. And we're pretty good about other things when we grant exceptions, like special park permits and things like that. But this is of a pretty serious nature because there needs to be a demonstration about what they're actually proposing technically, how it can affect the area, the environment, the aquifer. So it's going to be more than just, hey, is this okay? And have a presentation in front of you. So what we talked about internally was developing a process that you can use that would be kind of similar to the Board of Zoning Appeals process, okay? But it's not the BZA, okay? It's just going to be like, think of the form that you've all seen with them, where they fill out an application. It has the adjoining property information. It has all the necessary information for us to make decisions. It might have a section of what they want to do, and it might have a justification where they might have to prove it's not going to have a health benefit, a health, not benefit, a health detriment. For example, if I'm putting a septic system in, I'd want to know where the nearest wells of the town were or my neighbor were. You know, I'd want to know those things, and I'd want to have some type of expert say, well, we might not be able to definitely tell you, but we don't think that discharge in that area would affect a well, because we have a lot going on anywhere in town if we're allowing people to discharge where we're getting the community's water system. So to summarize, I think we come up with a application process that we can give this person, say, fill this out. These are the requirements. You're going to make a presentation after we review it, making sure that it's all right. You're going to make a presentation to the city council and have your opportunity to be heard. And you're not going to make a decision, the city council, until the experts on our end review their application. And then they'll present their response to you, and then you can weigh the balance at that point in time. It becomes a much fairer process because that way it's not based on emotion or who you know or where you are. It bases basically on the science of what is affected. So that's what we kind of came up with. And I didn't think that we needed to make a decision or a discussion on this application until we actually make them do something in writing. So I know the city manager and I talked about it. He might be able to fill in some details and some cracks.
Mr. Wieprick, you have anything to add?
Not much. I just liken this something like we several years ago, well, a couple of years ago, adopted the county's floodplain ordinance. And we had some discussion at that point about, well, what if somebody's property has a floodplain on it? Can they do this? Can they do that? And we talked a lot about there being a process by which they could approach the city to look for some sort of an exemption or ability to do that. And much like that process, this will rely more on subject matter experts than a gut response to it. So we need to develop that kind of a process, as Attorney Guller said. So I think we're heading down the right path on it, and we'll come up with something that's measurable and fair to anyone who might want to come and apply.
I think that's probably the most important thing, is that we approach this with the facts presented to us as opposed to what we think is best or not best for the city. So I think that is the best way to do it. I assume there's going to be several types of surveys available, hydrogeological surveys, things like that, that we would request. Is that kind of the route you're looking to take?
I think we are. I think the one thing is that we're going to say in general terms, we have to make decisions based on the health, safety, welfare issue and lay that out there, and then let the applicant prepare what they want. If they decide, hey, we're not going to spend the money on a hydrogeological survey, and you don't have that to review, and the town doesn't have that to review, then you take that into consideration. This is more like, and it is not, this is just hypothetical, more like a quasi-judicial decision on your part, basing it so that you can say, well, you didn't present us with this. The city shouldn't be obligated to do the work for an applicant. If they can't do the work for us to review, just like a person draws up their plans and our engineer reviews their plans, we shouldn't do it for them. And I'm also envisioning some kind of public component of this, and the fact that it shouldn't just be done. There should be an opportunity for anybody to comment, pro or con, kind of like the hearing with the BZA. So, I mean, it's going to be a thing. It's not going to be a simple thing where here's what you need to do. We take it in and we review it, and then we have a public comment, and then we look at it some more, and then you make a decision. That's kind of how I see.
I like the route you're going. I think it's a great idea. I want to seek consensus from the council, if I could, this evening, for them to proceed along this path. All right, I see a thumb up there. I see another, very good. By consensus, council is giving you direction to go forward along this route. All right, thank you all. That was a great way to handle that. With nothing else, I don't believe we have anything else. I will seek a motion to adjourn for the evening.
So moved.
And do I have a second?
Second.
All right, I have a motion from Councilman Haynes and a second from Mayor Pro Tem Foster to adjourn for the evening. All in favor signify with your thumbs up. No one's opposed. We are adjourned. Thank you all. I'll see you Monday night. Read your audit, and hopefully I'll see some of you at the MML Fall Conference.